Good morning. Welcome to the Minnesota Bike Walk Leadership Network webinar. We'll be talking about Stillwater today. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and we'll get started. The name of the webinar today is Chestnuts Roasting on a Car-Free Street. So we'll be talking about the Chestnut Street Plaza and the community spotlights on Stillwater. My name is Natalie Gilley. I'm with the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota, and we're at today, November 17th, 2021. So welcome. So in the previous webinars, we've sometimes had an icebreaker question. Today, the one is about Stillwater. So if you'd like to go to your chat box to introduce and put your name and location there, we also have a trivia question about Stillwater. What was invented in Stillwater? And we gave you a few hints. One of these is the correct answer. A, pop-up toaster, B, 3M post-it note, C, light bulb. So if you want to go ahead and put in the chat your answer, then we'll see if anyone gets this one right. So we welcome folks from Wabasha, Stillwater, a few who are here today, Jackson, St. Paul, and Rochester. I see a couple folks from Rochester. We did not plan for a tiebreaker question, but we'll let the speakers share the right answer once we get to the presentation. So you can wait with bated breath to the edge of your seat here to find out what was truly invented in Stillwater. So welcome everyone to the webinar. This webinar has a purpose of connecting local bike walk leaders to share stories and ideas about how they're lifting up the walking and biking culture in their communities. We have a land acknowledgement statement. We want to acknowledge that we occupy the ancestral land of the several indigenous groups, including the Dakota, Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk, Cheyenne, Oto, Iowa, and Meskwaki peoples. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. We affirm the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities. Despite centuries of colonial violence, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Indigenous peoples are still here demonstrating innumerable talents and gifts in the midst of continued oppression. They must be celebrated and uplifted. You'll see in the bottom of the screen here a link to a site that you can go to if you'd like to find out where, what land you're located on. And CJ, if you'd like to put the link in the chat box so people can see that, that would be wonderful. We'll get that posted up for you if you'd like to click on that. So just to let you know here, it's amazing. We're wrapping up the year here. We have one more webinar in December, on December 15th from 11:30 to 12:30, our third Wednesday of the month. And the spotlight community will be Rochester. The topic will be biking and walking for all ages. So that's the closing topic and spotlight community for 2021. Many of you might also be part of the Safe Routes to School Network. They host monthly webinars, and in December, they will be discussing the continued discussion on Boost Grant success stories, and we'll be featuring speakers Jenny Borden from Minneapolis Street Harassment Curriculum, from Minneapolis Public Schools talking about street harassment curriculum, and Sarah Stewart from the OWL Bike Tech Program. So that will be the topic for Safe Routes to School in December. So reach out to Eric T at movemn.org if you'd like more details about joining that network. So as I mentioned today, the topic is about car-free streets, and our featured spotlight community is Stillwater. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker today. So our first speaker is Rick Heidick from Stillwater, Minnesota. He's an active member of the Rotary and is currently president-elect of the Stillwater Sunrise Rotary Club. He is leading a Rotary initiative to end poverty in Nicaragua and has been to Nicaragua 6 times and is currently leading a water project for a community in Nicaragua. Rick is also currently vice chair of Sustainable Stillwater, Minnesota, a 501c3 that works to advance improvements in natural resources, energy conservation, and active, healthy lifestyles. For this group, he's leading the Bicycle Friendly Community Work Group and they've been working closely with the Stillwater community to advocate and advance bicycling in the community, and recently submitted an application for Stillwater, hoping to get an award as a bicycle-friendly community. Rick has been an avid bicyclist himself for over 30 years. Welcome to the webinar, Rick.
Great, thank you. And so if you could advance, please, next slide. So I wanted to start out real quickly and explain what's Sustainable Stillwater. Natalie mentioned Sustainable Stillwater, a little bit about this. And basically our vision is to be preserve our environment, championing healthy, resilient communities. Obviously, this is very involved with the city leadership and everything, but this is our mission as a advocacy group to do this. And then our mission specifically supporting local initiatives, promoting sustainability in Stillwater. Next slide. And how this is broken up. And so in Sustainable Stillwater, we have three main pillars. One pillar is to have a healthy and connected community. And so we have things like promotion of electric vehicles, looking at how an active transportation, active lifestyle in Stillwater happens. You can see at the bottom of this, our bicycle-friendly community work group. Advancing bicycle friendliness is part of that healthy, connected community pillar. We also have natural resource stewardship. So we have things like pollinator gardens, buckthorn removal, trash pickups, many things in that area around our natural resources. And then local business vitality, because this is fully intended to be an economic growth factor here as we work. And so we actually have a fairly significant program called Green Business Awards in that pillar. And those of you that are familiar with Green Step Cities, we're leading the Green Step City initiative along with the city that encompasses all three of those pillars. And then with bicycle friendliness, we feel actually picks up elements of all three pillars too. It's part of active lifestyle, but it impacts other things. And so this is how we're kind of formed in Sustainable Stillwater. Next slide. And so a little bit about Stillwater. For those of you that might be a little unfamiliar, it is the birthplace of Minnesota along the St. Croix River that divides Minnesota from Wisconsin. And it's a river community. The St. Croix is a national scenic waterway, which is going to factor into part of our discussion today. Also, it's a destination location, antique shops, B&Bs, but it's also been a center point for commuting. What you can see on the some of the top on the top left map is there's a bridge that we're going to be talking about. It's the lift bridge, the picture of it right below. And that lift bridge historically was the main crossing point, or a main crossing point for central Wisconsin, for people to commute from Wisconsin to the Twin Cities. And so what happened is this lift bridge was a commuter bridge. And so right across this bridge and through downtown Stillwater was tons of commuter traffic. And then when you get to downtown Stillwater, the main road that goes north and south through Stillwater along the river, Highway 95, is a trunk highway, was a heavily used commuter highway, and is managed by MnDOT. And so all of these factors come into play when you start talking about changing the use and how you adapt current roadways to car-free when you're dealing with roads that are highways and are commuter routes. Okay, next slide. And so what has happened over the years with the changes that has made what Tim is going to talk about feasible is two big things. Up on the upper left is that there's been an extension of a trail. It's a multi-use trail called Browns Creek Trail. And so if you've heard of or familiar with the Gateway Trail that runs from downtown Stillwater out to a park north of Stillwater, there was a branch that was created off of the Gateway that ran from the Gateway to downtown Stillwater called the Browns Creek Trail. And this is really significant. It's a 6-mile branch, beautiful trail, but it made Stillwater proper connected to the Gateway. The other is really the big deal is that there was an approval and construction of what's referred to as the new St. Croix Crossing Bridge. And this is a brand new bridge that was built just several miles south of the current lift bridge. Took a long time. Building a bridge across a national scenic waterway is not an easy thing to do. And what it wound up doing, though, is it diverted all of the commuter traffic from the lift bridge to the new St. Croix Crossing Bridge, which lessened all of the traffic across the lift bridge and through downtown Stillwater. The St. Croix Crossing Bridge is not connected to downtown Stillwater, south of town. When the design of the lift bridge is, they built designated bicycle and pedestrian lanes on the new St. Croix Crossing Bridge. And what this then eventually led to was the closure of the lift bridge to traffic, and enabled the completion and design. What you can see on the upper right is what we have referred to as the Loop Trail, which is a 4.7-mile trail that extends south along the western bank of the St. Croix, crosses the new bridge, comes up through Wisconsin, comes back across the lift bridge. And so all of this was made possible with the connectivity to Browns Creek, but then the construction of the new bridge itself. Okay, next slide. The other things is Stillwater proper. And so Stillwater leadership has developed a 2040 comprehensive plan. Within the comprehensive plan, the city leaders have specifically built into that the intention of having what's highlighted there: network of streetscapes, open spaces, walkways, bikeways, land uses, with the intent of balancing pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular needs. And so you can see this is in the long-term planning and in the vision of the city leadership, is to create more opportunities for pedestrian, bicycle needs and accessibility. Okay, next slide. And then the second document was the Stillwater Master Trails Plan. Again, in their vision and guiding principles is that their intention is to continue to try to make Stillwater one of Minnesota's premier trail destinations. And by doing, in order to do that, is they'll have interconnected trail systems, increasing bicycle trips for commuting, have a citywide bicycle system. So you can see again, is there guidance documents that the city leadership has developed that actually make it part of the vision and intention is, as we make changes in the city, is this is what we'll do to enhance bicycling and pedestrian use. Next slide. And so what has happened because of all of that through the comp plan and the trails plan is we have the new off-road trails like Browns Creek. We've added the St. Croix Loop Trail. We have new trailheads with bike racks and bike parking. We have new restrooms with water access, bike racks, e-bike rentals. So there's a lot of infrastructure and facilities that have been happening over the last few years in order to meet that city's vision. Okay, next slide. And then this adds to the downtown Stillwater bicycle friendliness. So it goes beyond park and bike, which is, a lot of times what happens if there's lack of interconnectivity. And so what the city has done through their trails and through this vision for the St. Croix Crossing, it creates a connectivity of trails and main street destinations that provides parking and services for bicyclists that weren't there. And the bottom three are really, really what happens to the city. It enhances Stillwater as a destination location for visitors coming, but it also improves the livability of the community residents themselves for the interconnectivity and use of the trails. And at the same time, because so much of this is connectivity to the downtown businesses, it creates new customer opportunities for our downtown businesses. So it's a win-win-win. Okay, next slide. And then how this happened, this is the summary here is that, this didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a simple change. Is how this has come about, especially with the loop trail, especially with the road closings, for auto that Tim's going to talk about, is it comes from the long-term city vision for making bicycling and pedestrians a priority. But it also needed other aspects like Browns Creek Trail. And so there are many different people involved in these decisions. So Browns Creek Trail was the city, was the Gateway Browns Creek Trail Association, was the DNR, needed the construction of the new bridge, which city, state, national impact here, MnDOT, Wisconsin DOT, and then the subsequent closing of the lift bridge to auto traffic. Once they closed the lift bridge to auto traffic and created the trail, then this in turn created new opportunities for other streets in downtown for minimizing auto traffic. And so there were a lot of factors that came into play, but it was the vision, focus, perseverance with the ultimate goals of improving pedestrian and bicycling in Stillwater that made this happen. Okay. There is a question that I have here. I tried to estimate the number of people who commute locally within Stillwater community. We actually did real quickly. We looked at that on the commuting within our bicycle friendly community application. It's minimal. There are other challenges for commuting, and so Stillwater. There's commuting from Stillwater to the Twin Cities, and so we have bike racks and Met Transit accessibility through public transportation for commuting. Commuting within the Stillwater is actually we're creating more bike routes and more bike lanes. Connectivity is throughout the city is a challenge right now, but and so it's minimal, but it's actually something we're working really hard on. Okay.
And Rick, if I could just kind of elaborate on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely heavy. And in a future slide, you'll note that I'm pretty new here, so I don't have this stuff memorized, but our comp plan has that data, like where are people commuting to work that live in Stillwater, work elsewhere. And if you drive on 36, you can see the congestion. So I know a majority historically has been commuter to other areas. We do have an industrial park, business park that is relatively small, but growing. And we'll start to see some of those patterns change over time, which we are seeing some indications of just that.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And next slide. And so to wrap up, I'll turn it over to Tim here, and Tim can get into the nuts and bolts here. So any information around Sustainable Stillwater, there's a link there for the Sustainable Stillwater organization as a whole, or if you need any information from me around bicycle friendly or the active transportation, there's my email address at the bottom. Feel free to contact me anytime. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tim.
Thanks, Rick. Tim, I know you're ready to roll here. We've got your slides ready and you're on video here. I do want to hold for just a moment to open this up for questions that people might have for Rick before we pivot to your presentation, Tim. There was a lot of information here that Rick just shared, some connections with different projects as overlapping with bicycle friendly work. And if you didn't catch this, but Stillwater did apply for bicycle friendly community this fall during that round, and we're waiting to hear what the result of that award is. So I'll pause for a moment here before we pivot to Tim's presentation and let folks ask any questions they might have of Rick.
Can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
Having ridden in the area a couple of times, one of the things that you didn't mention and that really stuck out to both myself and my riding friends was the driving community in Stillwater was amazingly considerate of the bicycles around them. We were really just overwhelmed with the kindness and patience that we were shown by people driving cars and trucks. And your community should get a pat on the back for that, if nothing else.
Great, thanks a lot. I appreciate that, and I ride a lot of the country roads myself, and I would say the same thing: is people are enormously respectful for bicyclists in and around Stillwater, and so thanks for that comment. I see the same thing. Another question: has Stillwater looked at the economic benefits of biking or extrapolated from statewide? We're getting more into that, and maybe Tim has more information, but we're looking at other economic benefits from other communities that have expanded their bike trails and bike use and bike friendliness. We know that's definitely a factor because there's so many bicyclists who come to Stillwater, especially for downtown. And one of the things that we've done recently is added bike racks. They're actually the bike corrals from Darrow, basically on Main Street. And so creating the connectivity from Main Street to the trails where the bikers are so that the bikers have greater access to park their bikes near where they're going to go into businesses and things like that. And so we definitely understand the economics, but we haven't quantified it so much yet.
I would,
Okay.
if I could add, so my position was kind of with my predecessor retiring, bringing me on earlier this year, they took the opportunity to put a much more economic development lens to the position I have as community development director. And the lead up to that was a report that just analyzed what was our economic development approach and what should we be doing differently. We know tourism is a very key indicator for us, and we know that tourism is growing, and we know, in some interviews and discussions with our business community, the recreation, the biking, the pedestrian is a key piece of that, especially during the pandemic. We have this Lowell Park downtown, Bridgeview Park to the south, and then new Lumberjack Landing Park to the north. We have this open space that has access to the river, and we know that is a major driver. So we know that there is a major positive economic development impact by the tourism created by this bike-friendly culture that is a unique opportunity. And I'll expand on that in a little bit too during my portion.
Great, thanks, Tim. There's another question about Bridge the Valley ride. So Bridge the Valley, for those of you that might not know, is a charity bike ride that was the first year was last August 15th. It starts and ends in downtown Stillwater, uses routes around the St. Croix. All of the routes cross the St. Croix River. So very, very scenic routes. It's put on by our local Rotary Club as a charity ride. Very successful. If any of you are bicyclists yourself and interested, come back. Our second year is this coming August 14th. But it's a fabulous ride in August in Stillwater around the river. Very scenic and a lot of fun. So that's the Bridge the Valley ride. Another question on bike counters. Bike counters are not officially installed yet. There have been some on the trails around Stillwater, nothing per se that downtown Stillwater that I'm aware of, but that's something that I know Tim and I will be talking about in the future to better quantify as like what are the peak periods, how many bicyclists and things like that. So it's more of that measurement that we're getting to. Okay.
Thanks, Rick. And thanks, Tim, for jumping in to answer some of these questions too. I think it's about time for me to introduce Tim so you guys know who the other guy in Stillwater here is that's answering these questions that you're throwing out here. So thank you for the questions that you've popped into the chat box here. And we will have a closing Q&A after Tim presents as well. If you think of some additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. The speakers are watching the chat box to respond to those questions, and I will be as well so that we can cover those. So our second speaker today is Tim Gladhill. He's the Community Development Director for the City of Stillwater. He recently joined the team in June 2021, where his primary focus is economic development and project management, also providing leadership to planning, zoning, and building safety inspections. Prior to that, Tim spent nearly 20 years with the City of Ramsey in northwestern Anoka County, starting as a public works maintenance worker in parks and utilities, ultimately also serving as planner, community development director, and deputy city administrator. Tim also volunteers his time to the American Planning Association, a 40,000 member organization serving the needs of local planners and communities. Tim has served as vice president and president of the American Planning Association of Minnesota's chapter, as well as ex officio member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and the chair of the APA Chapter President's Council, APA Board of Directors. So lots of connections with many of you probably who are participating in the webinar today. There's a lot of planners online here. Welcome to the webinar, Tim.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to jump right into everything Stillwater and get up to speed on a very historic town very quickly. So a lot of rich history, a lot of pivots that are occurring since the transition from the lift bridge to the St. Croix River crossing, and a lot of exciting things going on. So my presentation kind of picks up from that conversation, kind of the next phase of transitioning what used to be MnDOT right of way into, heavily focused on a lot of automobile traffic. If you ever traveled Stillwater on a weekend during the summer, you know that Highway 36 and Highway 95 at the time could be very congested. And if that lift bridge had a mechanical issue, it was kind of devastating to our downtown. So we pivot quite a bit, and my presentation again picks up now the lift bridge itself, still a MnDOT owned and operated facility, is now fully pedestrian. We're picking up that rest of that corridor known as Chestnut Street and turning it into more of a pedestrian plaza, but it's also part of a broader bike route planning effort between the City of Stillwater and Washington County. If you could go to the next slide, we can just spend a little bit of time on this one, but again, very new to the organization. So I don't have all the rich history of 50 years of planning for a river crossing that went into it. But, I see the after effects, the positive after effects, and really focus on not just that automobile traffic with the new bridge over the St. Croix River, thinking about multimodal transportation, et cetera. So next slide. With that transition, we've all heard the stories of there's this Main Street, historic downtown, transportation agency comes and reroutes that automobile corridor, and it can be devastating to a downtown. And there was a lot of fear and uneasiness about what was going to happen after we shove all of that traffic to the south into Oak Park Heights. We closed down that lift bridge for a couple of years while they rehab it. What's going to happen to downtown Stillwater? If you've seen the movie Cars, you can see, that whole story of that first movie was all about this town that almost died off because of that reroute. When in fact, because of the recreation, because of the bike, because of all of these other things that we were doing and event planning, trying to have more year-round events, we were successful in not having that traditional story to tell where the downtown died off because of the rerouting of the transportation corridor. So next slide. Coming into 2019, so pre-pandemic, the estimates were we were having over 1 million visitors per year. So we're uniquely situated on the St. Croix River. Our riverfront is protected as a recreation amenity. We're only 30 minutes from the two downtown cores, and so it lends itself to a lot of daytime visitors. Discover Stillwater is our joint powers agreement with the City of Oak Park Heights, our Convention Visitors Bureau. And so as we look about pre-pandemic, over 1 million visitors per year. Coming out of the pandemic, this past year, every quarter, we have broken records on our lodging tax revenue. So we know that there are far more visitors coming to Stillwater each and every day. And we saw this during the pandemic too, just the fact that we had this good balance of a built environment and recreation amenities. We saw tens of thousands of visitors every weekend, whether there was a planned event or not. So it's really exciting to see that. And we know that we continue to grow in tourism, actually to the point where some of our residential bases, we're putting too much energy downtown, too much stress on our services and our infrastructure. We got to balance that to where we are. So we've had such great success. We're trying to grow with that and build capacity to manage all of the visitors that are coming into our downtown Stillwater location. Next slide. Stillwater is really good. It's really important that we have historic preservation. The birthplace of Minnesota, which is our claim to fame, because that is where it was signed that Minnesota was going to become a state. So that territorial agreement was signed in Stillwater, and that set aside a few different things. Speaking of historic preservation, I know you're all on the edge of your seats to know what was that famous invention that was invented here in the city of Stillwater, and it was the pop-up toaster. I don't have a whole lot of details beyond who made that invention, but I know that the pop-up toaster originated in the city of Stillwater, Minnesota, which is kind of a cool claim to fame. Also along the lines of historic preservation, we also have these great amenities, this great infrastructure that we can reuse. So, had it not been for that lift bridge, we weren't going to get another pedestrian only river crossing. So we got to adaptively reuse a very historic structure that led to a very important 5-mile pedestrian loop and tie that into the new river crossing as well. Chestnut Street Plaza is an old automobile corridor that we get to adaptively reuse. So we're capitalizing on existing infrastructure, repurposing that. And then Rick mentioned the Browns Creek Trail. That was historically a rail corridor. If you know the history of Stillwater, obviously it was the early industry was focused on lumber production, lumber shipping. And so that is how we got our start. That was our early industry. So we have a lot of leftover rail corridors that have been repurposed as streets, trails, et cetera. So, we've had this opportunity to repurpose things that might not have ordinarily been there in the past. And also the Browns Creek Trail, a decade or two ago, many of you might have seen the commercials back in the day for the Minnesota Zephyr dinner train. It's that corridor that is reused as the Browns Creek Trail. Once it was determined that was no longer viable, the tracks were getting to a point where it just wasn't worth the maintenance. So that Minnesota Zephyr dinner train has not been operating for many years, but we see it's opened up to more use because it is a multi-purpose trail at this point. Next slide, please. One of the things I learned early on is that some of these amenities were actually part of the planning for the St. Croix River crossing. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of concern and opposition about the environmental effects, the cultural resources effects of putting the structure that you see on the screen, which is very visible. So unlike the lift bridge historically, which was low to the river, required that mechanical lifting of the bridge to get water traffic underneath it. This bridge is elevated to a height where it's very visible and doesn't have to have that mechanical lifting itself. And so there was a lot of concern about those effects because it is in a wild and scenic national designation. And so how do we kind of mitigate those effects? So that led to preservation of riverfront property. And in fact, another tidbit of information I didn't know before I started here is the City of Stillwater actually owns the property on the Wisconsin side, on the other side of the lift bridge. So that is part of city-owned property, but it's in the state of Wisconsin. So just an interesting thing that we've been able to continue to preserve our riverfront. And then we looked at the lift bridge as an opportunity to complete a trail loop, offset the effects of more automobile traffic on the new lift bridge in a different area. And in fact, even down to the color, if you've been in Stillwater recently, or if you've seen the images on the screen here of the lift bridge, it's no longer silver and very visible. It is painted green to better blend in with the cultural natural resources surrounding it. So a lot of thought went into mitigating the effects, which are real, for the St. Croix River crossing. Next slide, please. And then on the screen here, you just kind of see what that looks like in planner lingo. We love our vision, our values, our goals, but we love our maps too. So we have some draft cultural landscape districts, which is the bigger yellow outline along the river. And really that is trying to preserve what is there today and its current character. And then we have a couple other smaller, more focused historic preservation districts within that cultural landscape district. Next slide here. So getting into the nuts and bolts of the Chestnut Street Plaza, how in the world do you turn an old MnDOT right-of-way, which carried tens of thousands of daily vehicle traffic, into a pedestrian amenity that also is a plaza, but also serves as a major bike corridor throughout our community, and close it all down to automobile? So this will continue to be owned by MnDOT. MnDOT is providing dollars towards that, but the city is leading the design efforts on that. And that brings a lot of layers, and we learned a lot along the way, but it really shows that it takes perseverance, and it takes a lot of partnerships, and it takes time. Next slide, please. So some of this started with our downtown planning efforts, actually in 2008. So our previous round of comprehensive plans. So the river crossing was becoming more real at that point, and we knew that traffic was going to change. And that's where we start to see this concept, high level concept of what do we do with the lift bridge? What do we do with Chestnut Street Plaza when it's no longer open to automobiles? And so we start a high level planning effort in 2008 to reserve that corridor as a plaza. This is part of our comp plan. We have a whole chapter just on our downtown. Next slide, please. Also within that is we're in the St. Croix River Valley. We have beautiful scenic river vistas and view sheds. And you can see that we start to plan some of these major corridors. So we have major view corridors identified in our plan, and Chestnut Street itself is one of those major view corridors. We also have identified gateways into our downtown, and we put a lot of focal points into our design and investments in those areas. Next slide. So this was a major balancing act. And it's such a unique project where you've got MnDOT right-of-way with the city leasing right-of-way for a plaza. You have a nationally registered district that is downtown with some adjacent buildings. And then that involves MnDOT cultural resources. You have MnDOT funding, which means you have to meet their MSA, municipal state aid design standards for the plaza itself, cultural resources, ADA accessibility. So there are so many layers and so many pieces of balances that we had to do, but I love a challenge. I love to solve problems. A lot of that was done before I got here, but we still peeled back some onion layers as we got into actual construction design. And quite honestly, we misstepped a couple of times and had to back up and lost probably a year in concept planning, design, and really got behind the eight ball that we weren't able to time this with the lift bridge itself. But nonetheless, MnDOT has been a great partner, bringing dollars, bringing resources. We worked through those challenges, and we're really proud of where we've gotten here today. If you go to the next slide. A big piece of what we had learned was just kind of historic preservation. So again, because it continues to be owned by MnDOT, space leased by the city leading the design efforts, that brought some challenges that we didn't expect. And so we went through this year-long concept planning phase, and this was the original preferred concept. Very curvilinear design, a lot of landscaping. We saw trying to call back to red brick. We have a lot of red brick buildings in the area. We felt that there were probably pavers on Chestnut Street at one point, although for decades it hadn't been the case. It had been an asphalt road with concrete curb and gutter, pretty typical MnDOT trunk highway system. So we were really proud about the concept that we had done. We reached out to the community. We did a great public engagement process, and we whittled this down, and we kind of worked through MnDOT a little bit, but we forgot to ask the State Historic Preservation Office to weigh in on this on the concept planning stages. So again, the district itself downtown is a nationally registered area. Not all buildings are individually listed, but that public realm is part of the historic fabric of what we do. We have a lot of really good design standards for private buildings, public buildings, buildings in nature, but we didn't have any design standards about how do we redesign streets and some of our downtown design standards. We took it for granted, like who's ever going to argue with this cool concept plan that you see on the screen here? And we missed the boat. We did, and we own that. We missed the boat of working with SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office. So we get to this plan. We engage with a design consultant to get going on the construction plans, and we get this stop. This does not meet the Department of Interior standards for a historic district. You can't build that. You can try to go through an appeal process, but that is very lengthy and oftentimes very costly. So next slide. And again, I just call back to mitigation to the St. Croix River crossing. So we already did a ton of historic preservation, but we kind of doubled down on that to try to offset the implications of the St. Croix River crossing, which is half mile, 3/4 mile down the road from the lift bridge itself. So these are real implications. So next slide. So we had to start over. And we burned a little political capital with our council, with the public that, hey, we spent a lot of time coming up with this concept and now we got to start over. So the next slide will kind of show where we've ended up and where we finally have some agreement, not only with MnDOT, but with the State Historic Preservation Office. Next slide, please. So this is what the concept plan looks like a little bit now, a little bit more straight edged. It looks a little bit more like a standard street, but it is still closed off to the public. We weren't able to do the red brick pavers, trying to call back to, pre-MnDOT ownership of that road, pre-lift bridge. But we have to kind of fit this within that historic context that this was a trunk highway. So we've got those poured concrete sidewalks. We've got these zones of, what used to be parking. And we've got that center zone, which is that mixed use zone that we see, bike lanes, and then what we can close down and convert for major events. If you could go to the next slide, please, we have a little bit more detail of what that looks like. So although this is close to the automobile because of the historic preservation nature of that, we still have our sidewalk zones. We have our fixtures and drainage zone, and we change materials, change colors to delineate those. We have what used to be the parking zone, but as you can see, we're parking bicycles in there now. So that's kind of our space where we put our street furniture and our bike parking, because this will eventually also be a major bike corridor as part of Washington County's planning efforts. We have the mixed use zone in the middle. So that's where we have pedestrians coming out. We do have two ice cream shops in this corridor already. And then they have these window sales areas. And it was so popular during the pandemic and after that. You see a lot of just energy of pedestrians walking around, enjoying the space. And then we can convert it for some of our major events. Lumberjack Days is one of the popular summer events. So you'll see a lot of bands setting up stages in here. And it's just this really cool multi-purpose venue that we get to use for all of our events downtown. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit, we spent a lot of time on colors of pavers and types of pavers. Not only did we run into issues with historic preservation about the color of pavers, we also had to start thinking about ADA accessibility and the bicycle uses. So if you look at some of the really old historic brick paver streets, you can have those very large grooves, which create conflicts with bicycling and wheelchairs. So we had to design a little bit more modern plank that really made this a little bit more multi-use. Next slide, please. So we got to call out our funding partners, and we got to thank MnDOT for stepping up and thinking outside the box. If they are bringing $2 million to convert their right-of-way into a pedestrian amenity, the project itself is probably at about $2.4 million right now. So the city is also bringing some dollars to the table to make this all happen. This is kind of a once in a generation opportunity. We want to do it right. So as recently as last week, the council approved another $400,000 of our dollars towards this project to do it right. We could have taken out some of the design standards, such as the pavers, and gone back to the asphalt paving. We could have chosen not to replace the traffic signals, which are getting old and rusted. But if we're going to do this, we're going to go all in. We're going to do it right. And we're going to be very proud of what we have done. Next slide, please. So I get to come in the tail end of a lot of this too. So within a month of me being here, we finally got to do the grand opening for the lift bridge, known as the Lift and Loop celebration, something that the city helped plan along with our partners on the Minnesota side and the Wisconsin side. So huge 2-day event. And this is where we had the Bridge the Valley bike event the next day as well. But we finally got to celebrate the opening 1 year late because of the pandemic. But I will tell you, it seems like every weekend we had Carol Levin and Lee Valsvik and CCO talking about our Main Street and the lift bridge being open for a year. So really cool amenity, really important to the success of Stillwater during the pandemic, when we still had activity in a safe manner as well. So very cool to see that. And we're celebrating that 1 year late. That was just this past July. So this has been open for a year. There was a good year or two where they were disassembling the lift bridge, repairing it, painting it green, taking it off site, bringing it back, reassembling. So it was a really cool process to see. So this wasn't just kind of a quick close down the lift bridge and reopen it for pedestrians. Full rehab of a very important message. I do see a question that just popped in. The lift, the bridge, the St. Croix River crossing loop, is that plowed during winter? Last year, it was not, but this year, Last night, our council approved a joint powers agreement with St. Croix County on the Wisconsin side that the city of Stillwater will drive into Wisconsin, clear that 5-mile loop to make it all work. Because that was one of the major complaints that we had last year. And we learned that WISDOT operates very differently than MnDOT. MnDOT, we're used to seeing the MnDOT plowing MnDOT right of way. That's not the case in Wisconsin. They delegate to the county. So it's all the counties that clear off the state highways in Wisconsin. So we actually negotiated with St. Croix County to make this all happen. So very excited to see that occur. Next slide, please. So early coordination, biggest lesson we learned. We're a historic area. We should always be talking to SHPO and what we're doing to preserve those historic resources, cultural resources, and we own that quite a bit. Partnerships are key. Keep working with partners. The more partners you have, the better chance of funding you're going to get. That's true with Chestnut Street Plaza, but that's also true with everything that happened around the St. Croix River crossing, which there's a whole nother presentation in and on itself. It takes years of visioning and tenacity and energy. You know, there are several dozen times where we could have just, walked away, said, this is too hard. It's not worth the effort and energy, but our council had the vision to stick with it. And if we hadn't done that, we'd probably still be looking at the standard curb and gutter asphalt street and just saying, hey, it's a cool pedestrian amenity. We've got some concrete bollards that block it off the traffic like we didn't have now. But we stuck with it for years and years and years to make that happen. Next slide. I'm going to go through some of these rapid fire in the interest of time. And this is just the beginning too. So we talked about the lift bridge conversion. Now we're talking about Chestnut Street Plaza. Kudos to Washington County for doing their first bike and ped plan known as Move Washington County. We also have some good visions for the north and south side of town and our planning efforts along the river. Lumberjack Landing on the north side is a new park that we acquired within the last couple of years. Bridgeview Park is between the lift bridge and the St. Croix crossing. City owns that area. We've got some historic buildings there that we want to try to tie into the trail amenities. So more to come on that. We have a plan. Now we just got to find the dollars to make that plan a reality. So if you go to the next slide. Move Washington County. This is a quick snapshot of the map of after their year-long planning process of prioritizing missing trail connections. This is what that looks like. And included in this plan is this Chestnut Street area to connect kind of up in the Highway 36 area through Stillwater over to the lift bridge. So we are part of this Move Washington County plan. I'm really excited that there's another partner at the table to think holistically about bike ped planning. The next two slides, if you go to Bridgeview Park, this is just a quick snapshot of what's happening south of downtown, more trail connections, riverfront, bank stabilization, another river walk, walking amenity to separate bikes from walkers, it gets congested by our boat and packet area. We have a river cruise company that operates on the St. Croix River, and we have a lot of pinch points there. So we're trying to separate that a little bit. Next slide. Lumberjack Landing, we got $1 million donation to rehab a building, an old home on this site. We've got an award from the Park and Rec Association of Minnesota for the planning effort that went into this. So we're doing it, and this is what's driving our economic development efforts. And last slide. So lots of exciting things happening in Stillwater. I knew when I came on board, I was really excited to be there. I knew it would exceed my expectations, but they blew away my expectations with the bike ped planning and what that means for economic development. And again, I could go on the economic development impacts positive of bike ped planning and recreation planning as a whole nother side, but I am out of time already.
Thank you for your presentation, Tim. This is wonderful. You covered so much information, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing in just a moment. If you have, you see that Tim's email and phone number up on the screen, if you'd like to take those down, I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and we can take some questions for Tim and any other ones that you might have for Rick as well.
Yeah, looks like CJ had a good question about delineating where cyclists pass through in the plaza, and if we're going to delineate similar to the U of M spaces, on the U of M campus, very familiar with that too. Right now, we don't have that, and in fact, we have a trail. Part of the loop trail runs parallel to the St. Croix River. We just don't have a lot of space where we actually have bicyclists dismount as they go through downtown, just because it pinches and there's a lot of activity downtown. So unfortunately, we do have to have a little bit of a dismount as you get into downtown, just part of space. The other thing about being a historic town that predates the automobile, the right-of-ways aren't wide enough and the sidewalks didn't have that in mind. So the sidewalks in downtown Stillwater are very narrow. We just don't have a lot of space. So obviously we're not going to blow up our buildings and start over. So we have to kind of fit within the built environment that we have. And that presents challenges, but it's something we try to work through. The good news is we have so much activity that we have to worry about these types of issues.
Thank you for all your questions, CJ. This has prompted some great dialogue with Tim and Rick today as part of their presentations. So, and kudos to the community and the partnerships that you've developed to make these things happen and stick with your vision and bring it to fruition. It's really exciting to see this. So, all right, we have time for maybe another question or two. At the close of the webinar, we have some updates that we'll be getting here from Dorian about the legislative piece. So I'd like to make sure that we have just a couple minutes at the end for that. But another one have a question here. We do have another question in the chat box. Will any new bike trails go to the Lift Bridge Brewery? Of course, there's going to be about beer. Do either of you want to speak to that?
I'd have to look at kind of our master park and trail plan. There are some opportunities. I think about kind of building off of the Move Washington County plan, which is trying to plan for bike facilities on their facilities. And there's an opportunity knowing the industrial area pretty well. So the challenge is that Lift Bridge Brewery is not downtown Stillwater. It is up in our industrial area, and we try to fit through some major transportation corridors, but we look for those opportunities. There are definitely opportunities to make it happen. There will be some pinch points on some of the connector routes to get there. I'll also note that there is a brewery downtown. We love Lift Bridge Brewery. They're awesome. We want to make sure they stay there. They have a second location in New Richmond that is fairly new, but we continue to make sure that they have their home base here in Stillwater. But River Siren Brewing, which used to be Maple Island Brewing as of like a month ago, is right downtown Stillwater. And so we have that too. There's plenty of opportunities to get a brew downtown. There's lots of restaurants. We got a couple distilleries downtown. So yeah, there's cool opportunities.
Well, and one quick note on that is if you can't take the trail to the brewery, then you bring the brewery to the trail. So one of the things we're looking at for our bike event this summer is to the option, an opportunity of having some of our local craft brewers participate, including Lift Bridge for our bike event downtown. So we're pulling the brewers into our events as much as possible as we do that. So biking and beer drinking do go hand in hand.
Yeah. And one last plug on that. Sometimes the city's best economic development strategy is to just get out of the way of some private endeavors. So we've done a lot of COVID era flexibility. So outdoor dining, closing off streets, using parking stalls for parklets. But one of the more popular things was open containers of Lowell Park, the park right downtown on the river. And we look to kind of make that as maybe a more permanent solution. So yeah, there's definitely opportunities there.
That's great to hear. And, this is, a nice dovetail with bicycle friendly business as an opportunity for any of these businesses that do promote bicycling and walking to get involved in that being recognized as a bicycle friendly business. And Dorian has mentioned gas stops.
A guest house I just saw next door. However, quick note, the guest house is closing at the end of this year. For those that didn't know.
That was going to be my rousing introduction for Dorian segue.
sorry to be a downer there.
Well, that's a bummer. However, it does sound, as Tim mentioned, there are other opportunities if you do want to go downtown, socialize, and ride your bike to Stillwater. So I'm going to hand it over to Dorian here for just a couple of closing comments with the legislative brief and a few other updates from BikeMN. Dorian, welcome to the webinar.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Rick. The Two Bridge Loop is my go-to ride for when I want to ride 25 miles. It's a fabulous route from my house that, believe it or not, is all trail from about 2 blocks from my house. So I choose to ride in the street part of it, but I do Gateway and Browns Creek to get to Stillwater. Well, I just wanted to mention, for those of you who haven't noticed, I did a very long and detailed blog post about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was signed by the president earlier this week, or just on Monday, I think. And the reason we should pay attention is it includes 60%, more than 60% more money for transportation alternatives, which is the federal bike walk grant program. And it has a ton more money for safety of vulnerable users. And I'm going to count on all of you around the state to help me ensure that the Department of Public Safety, who administers the Highway Safety Improvement Plan and those funds, does a great job with the mandatory vulnerable user safety plan. The other great thing is it makes that safety money, or makes Safe Routes to School eligible for that safety money. So there's even another pot that we can access for Safe Routes to School for, I assume, really serious safety issues. I wanted to just quickly share that BikeMN will again be at the legislature, and our priority this year will be to pass the operation of a bicycle update laws in a policy bill. Those are things like as far to the right as practicable, riding through a right turn lane without turning right, and a few other details. Not things that people are getting tickets for, but things that'll improve safety for bicyclists. But I also wanted to share that MnDOT is in the process, or the governor's in the process of putting together a capital investment request to the legislature's bonding committees in the House and Senate. And for the first time ever, they've asked for a lot of active transportation money. I think it's $7 or $8 million. And this year they got $5 million for safe routes and $5 million for active transportation. The safe routes request for proposals is out right now. So be sure to engage if you have a safe route project. And the active transportation one will be out later or next year, I think. And it'll prioritize actually active transportation planning in communities. So that's pretty exciting. But it's exciting that MnDOT is aggressively asking for more active transportation and safe routes money. And the last thing I wanted to, or the last things I wanted to share with you is that we are hiring, and we are hiring 4 people. And they are not posted yet, but watch for those. One will be, the top priority will be to replace Michelle Kiefer, our Safe Routes to School education manager, for the last 9 years has resigned to take a ship-related job with Centricare Healthcare System in Wilmer in Southwest Minnesota. But we will be hiring a full-time program assistant for our Adult Learn to Ride program in the metro area and our Safe Routes to School program. We'll be hiring a half-time office assistant and an intern. So watch for those announcements. They'll be on the homepage of our website. And we will also be announcing a call for nomination for board members for BikeMN. The pandemic kind of threw off our board recruiting, but we're going to dive back into that in December and January and be aggressively recruiting. And the wonderful thing about Zoom is that those board members don't have to live in the Twin Cities. So I'm looking to all of you for suggestions of people from all over Minnesota that have expertise in a variety of nonprofit areas and biking and walking. So thanks for the time, Natalie. Only a minute over here.
Thanks, Dorian. This is great to get these updates, and there is a lot of information in the chat box. You'll see contact information for both of our speakers, Rick and Tim. Thank you so much for presenting today. There's also some links to some other information. Tim shared a link on here about the Chestnut Street Plaza project for more information. So go ahead and click on that if you'd like to check out more details on that project. And feel free to reach out to the speakers if you have some additional questions. So thank you everyone for participating in the webinar today, and we hope to see you all in December. Have a great rest of the day.